Hey, Legal Rebels, this is Tom Martin. I'm the founder of LawDroid, and this is my podcast, LawDroid Manifesto, where I interview legal innovators about how they do what they do. In this episode, I interview Aliza Shatzman, founder of the Legal Accountability Project, the first and only nonprofit working full-time to ensure that judicial law clerks have positive clerkship experiences. Hey there, welcome to the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. I'm Tom Martin, your host, and I'm honored today to have on the show Aliza Shatzman, who is the president and founder of the Legal Accountability Project. Got a personal connection there. So as you may know, I organize, along with Kat Moon and Patrick Pallas, the American Legal Technology Awards, which we had this past October. And Aliza and her organization won not only one, but two categories. And so she is a standout in what she's achieved. Graduated from law school in 2019, so she's had quite a trailblazing experience so far. And so with that, I'd like to introduce you, Aliza, and if you could tell us a little bit about what you're up to now.
Sure. So thanks for having me on the show. I am the president and founder of the Legal Accountability Project, which is a nonprofit I launched 2.5 years ago following my very negative judicial clerkship experience, during which I was harassed and terminated and retaliated against by a now former judge. And the goals of the project are to ensure that more judicial law clerks have positive experiences, and then to extend support and resources to the folks who don't have such positive experiences. And, we really are trailblazing in not only the legal tech space, but also just really innovating in the judiciary, a place which is notoriously slow to change, using our legal tech platform to increase transparency, accountability, diversity, and equity in judicial clerkships and the judiciary.
Well, I know on the website, it says a better judiciary makes a better society, I believe. I think that you've really taken concrete steps to achieve that. And I do want to get into a lot more detail about your experience with the organization, your founding of it, and all that. But first, let's go back to the beginning. I like to talk to guests about their origin story. And so if you could share with us where you grew up, what was that experience like? What were you into as a kid?
So I'm from suburban Philadelphia. I went to Upper Dublin High School in Ambler. I was a golfer and a runner in high school, and I was a golf recruit at Williams College, where I graduated in 2013. I was pretty, political and kind of activisty, advocacy oriented as a child. Mom's a doctor. Dad was a community college dean, and some of my earliest memories are of going to the Million Mom March with my mom in DC. That's a gun control movement. So that was me in high school. Went off to Williams thinking I wanted to be a doctor, possibly an OBGYN, possibly an abortion provider. Like I said, my mom is a doctor. She's a pediatrician. I did not do so well in, bio and sciences at Williams. Kind of got the political bug and kind of realized I might want to go to law school. So it's kind of how the journey charted from there.
Well, interesting. And something that we have in common is that when I started undergrad, I was pre-med and I was all excited about that until I hit the chemistry and bio courses. And yeah, kind of the same.
I mean, I hit Bio 101 and I think I got back-to-back C's in 101 and 102, my worst grades in Williams and ever. And so it was pretty clear I wasn't going to medical school after that. So, yeah.
Okay, so the draw to law school, do you think it came from kind of the activism and all of that? Or did it were there any other experiences that you had, maybe somebody who was a lawyer, or how did that come about?
So I was very interested in politics, definitely in high school. I remember Bill and Hillary Clinton came to my high school in 2008. And I mean, Hillary Clinton always has been and still is my greatest political influence. I mean, influence generally. And she is, of course, also a lawyer. So I think it was the interest in politics that led to the interest in law. During college, I did a bunch of different internships on Capitol Hill. After college, I interned and then worked on the Hill. So it was related to that. I always knew that I wanted to use my law degree to create change, work in the public interest. There was never a moment when I ever wanted to work at a law firm or kind of do anything other than public interest oriented work. So, yeah. But I did think I would practice law, which, in reality, I really haven't, but it's okay. I use my law degree in other ways.
You're based in Washington, D.C., right?
I am based in DC. Moved to DC right after college to intern and work on the Hill, and then kind of bounced back and forth. 3 years in DC, went off to law school, was a 1L at UNC, and then transferred to WashU, and then was in DC every summer and a semester, and then moved back to DC right after law school for my clerkship. And I've been here off and on ever since. 2 years in Pennsylvania during the pandemic where I stayed with my parents. I think the move back to Pennsylvania is imminent. It is home. DC is kind of a transient city. But yeah, it's kind of how I bounced around a little bit.
Well, it sounds like you're very driven to get out there, and now you're there, and you're making a good impact. All right, so let me ask you about your transition to working in the courts. You did a clerkship or internship.
I did. I clerked during the 2019 to 2020 term in DC Superior Court. That is the, local trial court in DC. And the DC courts are unique. I mean, DC is not a state. We have local judges who are Senate confirmed for 15-year terms. I'm trying to think back. It's been a couple years since I clerked there. So they're Senate confirmed for 15-year terms. I knew that I wanted to be, by the time I graduated from law school, a homicide prosecutor in the DC U.S. Attorney's Office. I had done 4 different internships at different components in the Department of Justice, and then decided to clerk in the jurisdiction in the courthouse where I wanted to practice law. So I was, very focused. I definitely had a plan. And for anybody who doesn't know, and I imagine your listeners, most of them probably know what a judicial clerkship is, but in case they don't, it's when like a new attorney, fresh out of law school, maybe a few years work experience, but it's a pretty entry level position, will spend a year or two working for and learning from a judge. And judicial clerkships are messaged at my law school, WashU, still to this day, and at literally every law school, and I have visited, I think, 50 of them at this point, as just a uniformly positive experience, like a lifelong mentor-mentee relationship between judge and clerk. The position will confer only professional benefits, it's going to be the best year of your life. I've been working in a space where I am steeped in folks' negative clerkship experiences for 3 years now, so I think I have a good sense of what all is out there. And that experience that I just described to you is the exception. It's certainly not the rule. And unfortunately, one of the systems LAP bumps up against is just this uniformly positive and misleading clerkship messaging. And so I bought into that. I was applying for clerkships in 2016 and 2017. Notorious harasser and former judge Alex Kaczynski had resigned in scandal at that time. I was not applying for those fancy Ninth Circuit clerkships. I was not in those prestigious circles where I would have been super aware of that. And the information I had about clerkships was very limited. My law school did not have too much information. They helped me apply, and that was great, but I was mostly on my own. And I very much listened to their messaging about apply broadly, so across the US, across the political spectrum, accept the first clerkship you're offered. I did those things. And now I really caution students in my work, not to do those things, to be more discerning. And we'll get to a lot of the work I do with law students now to inform and educate and empower them. As I said to you at the top, I was very activisty growing up. If somebody had told me, Aliza, as a law clerk, you might be subjected to sexual harassment and you are not protected under anti-discrimination laws, and some clerkships are bad, you need to be discerning about the information, I would have been pretty galvanized to make things better for myself and my peers. And another challenging aspect of the work is just galvanizing students to take agency and ownership over their careers.
So one thing I want to backtrack a little bit because, you know, we're going headlong into the clerkship, which I do want to talk about, but it seems like you were so driven to get to that. And so I think I'm missing the part about when you were in law school, like what the experience was like there where you found that direction. Was there anyone that you spoke with or a class that you took that was inspiring, or what got you going down that route?
Yeah, it's funny. I talk about law school a lot. I reflect on my own law school experience a lot. I started at UNC and transferred after 1L year. I struggled with the LSAT. I just couldn't get a good enough score to get into a top school. I felt really grateful to be able to transfer to WashU because I was not very happy at UNC. It was just not a good fit. And so, I preface some of this by saying that I felt like grateful to be at WashU, which is really not a great position to be in, to feel like you owe somebody something because you might make decisions that are not necessarily in your best interest. So got to WashU and knew that I wanted to be a prosecutor, knew that I wanted to work in public interest. And, the messaging around clerkships is that they are a necessary checkbox for many legal jobs. DOJ job postings say that they require 1 year of work experience. That is really a euphemism for a clerkship expectation. So I understood immediately the importance of clerking. There was a wonderful dean. Her name is Nancy Stout. She's not the dean anymore. And she was kind of the one who kind of inspired my interest in clerking. I kind of struggled to find my footing at WashU the first year, but I mean, she kind of helped me get back on that path to wanting to clerk. And so I definitely, she's one of the people I kind of think about when I think back on my WashU experience. And so that's kind of what led me to that path. I applied for federal clerkships, didn't get any bites, then was in DC and kind of knew I wanted to be there. The interesting thing about my own clerkship, and one of the challenging aspects of it, of which there are many, the judge for whom I clerked was abusive. He is no longer on the bench. He is a WashU alum. And a big challenge in my work is that law schools are protecting abusive judges generally, but especially when they are law school or university alumni. And so that kind of looms large in the challenges I think about in my own experience and other law schools, is that he was an alum. And so I understood they would protect him. So, but that's what it led to my interest in clerking. And, for me, it was very much checking a box. I needed to clerk. I needed my 1 year of work experience to be a homicide prosecutor, to be an AUSA. And so I tell students now, that is a totally acceptable reason to clerk. Check a box, get the experience. You should not be blinded into thinking, I will accept abuse in order to clerk. And to be clear, I did not know at the time I accepted the clerkship that the judge was abusive. In retrospect, after I was fired, I found out he had mistreated other alums from WashU, and the law school knew about that, and it opted not to kind of share that information with me. But the messaging around clerkships is very strong, especially at top 20 law schools, at all law schools. The pressure to clerk is very strong.
And you said that you found that the kind of like positive experience was more of the actual exception than the rule. Is that right?
Yes, definitely.
Do you think like the structure of it that creates a negative dynamic? For example, like you said, to check the box. I've had that experience too, many years ago in law school, that if I wanted to go down certain professional routes, that would be something I'd have to do if I wanted to get that, job with the DOJ or something like that. It seems to me like maybe that dynamic where someone, they know you need them, that it might have a negative, effect. What do you think about that?
Yes, exactly. So there's a couple things about the structure and nature of judicial clerkships that can make them particularly conducive to harassment and other forms of mistreatment. So if you are clerking for a federal judge, they are life tenured, they are Senate confirmed, they're the most powerful members of the legal profession. There is no greater power disparity in the legal profession right now between that of a life tenured federal judge and a fresh out of law school judicial clerk in their first job, totally dependent on that judge for references and career advancement. And to be so dependent on that judge who can make or break your career is incredibly dangerous. Lump on top of that, the federal judiciary is exempt from all anti-discrimination protections. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Americans with Disabilities Act, the Rehabilitation Act, paid family leave, union organizing, which is a little bit less important, though still kind of important. Everything. They're exempt from basically all laws, all laws that would apply to you as a worker.
What?
Lump on top. Oh, yeah.
Hold on a second. Hold on a second.
I can see you face palming. This is really important. I'm still reaching people who do not know this. So,
yeah. So I want you to repeat that in a second. But okay, 53 years old, 25 years experience under my belt. I actually did a summer externship for Judge Stephen Reinhardt in the Ninth Circuit.
Oh my gosh.
But I didn't realize that. Can you please repeat that?
And I also, just to be clear, I'm saying, oh my gosh, Stephen Reinhardt is deceased now. And after his death, Olivia Reinhardt testified about her experience with mistreatment. I have a board member who clerked for Judge Reinhardt, so we kind of know what kind of chambers he ran. So judicial law clerks exempt from all anti-discrimination laws. They always have been. Now, when Title VII was passed in 1964, it applied to private businesses. But that legislation was expanded to protect more workers in the 1990s, pursuant to two different laws: Congressional Accountability Act, Executive and Presidential Office Accountability Act. Congress extended Title VII protections to itself and its employees and to the executive branch. Federal judiciary in the 1990s was just vociferously opposed to any kind of regulations. We can, self-regulate or self-police. That, when you think of other insular orgs like the military, like police unions, that we know does not work. They claimed, separation of powers, which is really a judicial supremacy argument. They believe they are above the laws. So, they've made those same ridiculous arguments since the 1990s up until the present day. And the federal judiciary is a workplace that, harassment, abusive conduct are pervasive and unaddressed in the federal courts. They don't like me pointing out these problems because they have literally zero interest in addressing them. That does not mean the problems don't exist. I counsel mistreated clerks on their limited options every single week that I have run the nonprofit. LAP runs, independent third-party solutions that do not wait on the federal judiciary or law schools or Congress to make change. But there is no substitute for extending basic anti-discrimination protections to law clerks and to federal public defenders, similarly exempt from Title VII because they are part of the federal judiciary under the Criminal Justice Act, also an outrageous injustice. The basic workplace protections that apply to most other workers, like people listening to this podcast, should apply to judicial law clerks too. And unfortunately, what happens too often is law clerks are bullied, harassed, discriminated against, fired, retaliated against, and they have no legal recourse when they're mistreated by the most powerful members of the legal profession.
I'm kind of embarrassed to say I didn't know that, and it's really great. It's really great for people to know that, who are listening. It's very, very unfair, inequitable, and I hope it changes, and I hope the work you're doing creates that change.
So this is one of the most urgent civil rights issues of our time. There are more than 30,000 employees in the federal judiciary: law clerks, permanent clerks, public defenders, judges themselves, courthouse staff. who are exempt from anti-discrimination laws. And I didn't know this either until I was a recently fired law clerk in July of 2021, trying to figure out my options, trying to find an attorney, and discovered that I could not sue my harasser and seek damages for harms done to my life. And at that time, I became involved with some, congressional advocacy around the Judiciary Accountability Act, or JAA. That is legislation that would extend Title VII protections to the federal judiciary. My congressional testimony in support of that legislation in March of 2022 kind of launched me into this kind of advocacy world, and I launched a nonprofit soon after. That legislation was reintroduced in September of 2024, so pretty recently, after another Ninth Circuit harasser, Joshua Kindred, resigned in scandal. The federal judiciary fucking hates this legislation. They are just vociferously opposed. Their arguments are so ridiculous for an entity that is just mired in scandal to bury their heads in the sand and decide no changes are necessary is just morally reprehensible. Unfortunately, that legislation is probably not going to go anywhere in the next Congress because of the political climate. It's definitely a bipartisan issue, and it was reintroduced with support from Lisa Murkowski. But congressional Dems have really been moving this thing forward. And unfortunately, even Democrats kind of cower in the face of federal judges. And between congressional intransigence and federal judiciary intransigence, it's hard to make change within the federal government right now. But I keep talking about this legislation. I was involved in the reintroduction, and LAP is proud to support the legislation, and we're going to keep at it. I mean, we know the federal judiciary is sitting up and taking notice. They are very afraid of my nonprofit, which is a great place to be in. We know we're doing something right if we're pissing off federal judges.
Let me ask you this, just from an outsider standpoint, in that I'm not as familiar with, obviously, with with the rules and regulations that don't exist.
Exactly. No rules, no regulations around ethics in the courts, but yeah.
Right. So for me, it begs the question of, is there an actual principled reason for them to oppose it? I mean, I see, like, initially on its face, superficially, separation of powers, like, you're the legislature, you can't tell us what to do. But how, like, even in light of that, it still seems completely unfair to have nothing,
Yeah.
and the self-regulation appears obviously to be extremely lacking or non-existent. So how can there be any counter argument to what you're asking for?
So to answer your question, then I'll go into some reasons why. No, there is no principled reason to oppose extending anti-discrimination protections to 30,000 judiciary employees. Unfortunately, the federal judiciary, pretty powerful, good at gaslighting people, good at misleading people and concealing and withholding information. And they, historically been able to pull the wool over some people's eyes. Now, LAP, we are shining a very public spotlight on the misconduct and the ethical lapses within the federal courts. But no, there's no good reason. The separation of powers argument doesn't even hold water. The federal judiciary is a co-equal branch of government. Yet the federal judiciary comes to Congress, a co-equal branch, for their budget. Every single year, they request more money, including apparently more money to deal with law clerk and workplace issues. There have historically been zero metrics for success. Now, I think this year, House Oversight, led by Norma Torres, who's been a champion for the JA, the Judiciary Accountability Act, has said there should be some strings attached. The judiciary should, release some data and prove that their internal self-policing, in scare quotes, is effective. Of course, federal judiciary, judicial nominees also come to Congress, who advises and consents and, confirms judges. So the separation of powers doesn't really hold water. Congress is doing lots of things that regulate the federal judiciary. They should be regulating their workplace conduct, their ethics as well. So the federal judiciary makes these, bullshit is really the only way to describe them, these bullshit self-policing arguments. And they're ridiculous because their internal mechanisms of self-policing have historically led to an outrageous lack of policing and lack of discipline for judges who mistreat their clerks. Federal judiciary has historically relied on this internal workplace dispute resolution plan called the Employee Dispute Resolution, or EDR plan. They just released their first annual workplace report claiming the efficacy of the EDR plan. Their report showed that over the past 2 years, from 2021 to 2023, only 9% of the 78 EDR matters were initiated by term law clerks. What does that mean? Fewer than 7 complaints were filed by law clerks over 2 years, fewer than 5 complaints per year. I hear from more mistreated law clerks than that, like, per month. So their internal reporting mechanisms are not working. And let me tell you what law clerks tell me, because mistreated law clerks reach out for assistance every single week. And I have to say, despite knowing that their options are inadequate, I always tell them to report internally, talk to your director of workplace relations, file an EDR complaint, file a Judicial Conduct and Disability Act complaint. We'll talk about that. I always tell them to report. They tell me over and over, they have not and would not report sexual harassment and misconduct to the federal judiciary. They do not believe their concerns will be taken seriously. They do not think they'll be investigated vigorously. The judiciary has historically protected judges. And this EDR plan is presided over by fellow judges in the courthouse, where the mistreated law clerk and the respondent judge work. The judge's friends and colleagues, and judges have been quoted as saying, "Oh, he probably didn't mean it," and "Oh, he's such a nice guy." Judges are unable or unwilling to sit in impartial judgment of their colleagues. And rank and file judges tell LAP, they've even sometimes told the press, that they don't think this is the right system, that they don't want to preside over their colleagues', misconduct. But when push comes to shove, and we really need judges to step forward and attach their names to this and say change needs to be made, they're cowering in the face of the Administrative Office of the U.S. Courts, or the AO, which doesn't speak for judges, but was run by a director who has made some really regressive statements about there not being a judicial problem. He has, pointed to folks like me as alarmists who live in a 6-year post-Kaczynski time warp. I am pointing out systemic failures and the fact that law clerks are not reporting misconduct. Should he choose to perceive that as alarmism, whatever. And then the other option for clerks. So EDR, no remedies are available to clerks. I mean, they can be reassigned to a different judge, but no monetary remedies are available, even for those who have been, fired or retaliated against and who suffer harm. And law clerks need to hire attorneys for this, pseudo legal process, where far too little is put in writing and it's very confusing. But, attorneys are historically not willing to represent them because they work in that circuit and they don't want to go up against a judge in the place where they are representing paying clients. So law clerks out in the cold, on their own, navigating this Byzantine process, where the directors of workplace relations and other folks in the federal judiciary basically serve as HR for the judiciary, dissuading them from filing complaints. The federal judiciary is trying to suppress law clerks from filing complaints, suppress information about misconduct, and that is basically the system in which we live. There is also the Judicial Conduct and Disability Act, the judicial complaint process, whereby a judge could theoretically be reprimanded or suspended or even impeached, so that really never happens. Also an underutilized process, fewer than 5 law clerk complaints per year, typically under the JC&D Act. I'm making it sound bleak because I got to say it really is. And law clerks are typically not willing to stick their necks out and report when they know the odds are stacked against them. And the judiciary has historically protected their own fellow judges. And law clerks typically keep their heads down and move on. And then they stay silent years, decades later, even facing the mental and emotional trauma of that experience, worried that if they speak out, the judge will retaliate against them, get them blackballed from their dream jobs, as, I was, and many others are. And they're afraid, even after the judge has died, that their army of powerful clerks will go after them for speaking out. So we have historically lived in a culture of silence and fear, one of deifying judges and disbelieving law clerks. And, LAP is empowering clerks to report, shining a public spotlight on these issues. But it's bleak right now in the federal courts. If are a court watcher, or, law clerks, or you're an aspiring clerk, or you're just a concerned citizen, you should have zero confidence in the federal courts right now when it comes to ethics, when it comes to impartially resolving sexual harassment and other misconduct disputes. The federal judiciary spends so much time touting their law clerk program. The federal judiciary runs on the labor of law clerks, and they do not care one bit about law clerks' well-being.
All right.
A lot.
Yeah, that's a lot. And thank you for going into all that. I mean, we did kind of dive headlong into all of it, but I do want to take a step back and kind of reframe it a little bit, because in founding the Legal Accountability Project, if you can share, like, what in particular was the mission that you had in mind when you were establishing it, and then related to that, what are maybe a couple of initiatives that you have that are tied to those mission values?
So, the mission is to ensure that more judicial law clerks have a positive clerkship experience while extending support and resources to those who do not. The values on which the organization is based are transparency, accountability, diversity, equity, and empowerment. And we accomplish this through some legislative advocacy, a lot of thought leadership in public education, and innovative legal technology. The hallmark of our work, our main initiative, and when I conceptualized the nonprofit, I thought this would be one aspect of our work, and it's really become the big one, is this centralized clerkships database, basically Glassdoor for judges. It is a legal tech transparency platform where law clerks who've worked for judges can review their judges as managers, as bosses, anonymously if they choose. Now, nobody's anonymous to LAP. They register using their full name, their law school, their class year, all the information, but they can be anonymous to students reading surveys in the database. And students pay to access the platform. It is $40 for a year of access to read thousands of reviews of judges. We have democratized judicial clerkship information. We have upended the clerkship system and replaced the really dangerous clerkship whisper network, whereby those who are mistreated whispered fearfully to maybe a couple friends about the mistreatment. But unfortunately, especially when it comes to abusive judges and bad managers, that information really did not get from the law clerks who had it to the students who needed it. Our platform, we've been collecting surveys for 18 months. We have nearly 1,500 reviews of judges, more than 1,000 judges reviewed on the platform. Our database is 2 or 3 times the size of the largest internal law school clerkships database. We launched the platform for student users in April of 2024. So we've been doing this for coming up on a year now. We had 1,000 student and young lawyer users last season. We are well on our way to doubling the number of users this year. When I conceptualized this initiative, it was really premised on what I understood a handful of law schools to be doing already. Before I launched the nonprofit, I quit my job in April of 2022, launched a nonprofit in June. And during that gap, I was having a lot of conversations with law school clerkship advisors, clerkship directors, deans of career services, law school deans, about the resources they use to help students identify a beneficial clerkship and avoid abusive judges. And this was really informed by my own experience at WashU Law, where I had no information about judges as managers and applied blind. And then later found out the law school knew that this judge had mistreated other alums and had opted not to share that information with me. And so I was thinking, how do we get information about mistreatment from, law clerks who have it and law schools who have it to the students who need it in a way that empowers those clerks and makes them less fearful about sharing that experience? Because look, I do think that law clerks have a duty a moral and ethical duty to report, not just to the judiciary, but to share their experiences with those coming up after them. But I ultimately understand the fear that many clerks have of retaliation. And as someone who was retaliated against, I understand that fear too. So, handful of law schools have these internal clerkships databases. They are very proud of them. They are not good. Uh,
How so? How are they not good?
This is my favorite question, ragging on law school clerkships databases. Okay. So the clerkship surveys in law schools' internal databases are almost uniformly positive. And which leads you to question the veracity or the truthfulness of literally all the surveys, because of course, not every law clerk's experience was positive. But, of course, maybe let's dig deeper. When we go to just the surveys about the notoriously abusive judges and bad managers, the folks, I can agree with law school clerkship advisors, not the best bosses. Either no information at all. So I'm thinking about clerking for Judge X who's abusive. I have no information at all. Or troublingly, positive. Law schools have positive surveys published in their databases about notoriously abusive judges. They have no disclaimer that says, contact us if you're thinking about applying to this judge, talk to somebody first. They're not warning anybody. There is or should be legal liability for these law schools who have held out their databases as the go-to source for information and are negligently, willfully, ignorantly, or willfully leading students into abusive clerkships to increase their clerkship numbers. That is basically what these databases look like. And those are the more robust ones. Then there's some that just have very few surveys. And when you talk to a combination of the clerkship advisors and the law clerk alumni, we're really finding out law schools are not working too hard to collect these post-clerkship surveys. I mean, there are some schools. I was talking to an alum today who said, like, oh, my clerkship advisor never even reached out to me to fill out a post-clerkship survey. So, like, the top law schools are not working too hard to get the information because they are most interested in funneling students to as many clerkships as possible to up their clerkship numbers. They really don't care very much about whether the experience was positive. So LAP has been dogged in our efforts to collect broad, candid information about clerkships. And we have figured out several strategies to reach out to law clerks that work and get people to share candidly, whether their experience was the most wonderful year of their life or the worst year of their life. And we certainly know where all the bodies are buried. And if you are a judge who mistreats their clerks, you should certainly be concerned about getting way fewer clerks this year. But of course, we also spotlight all the wonderful judges who are great managers and mentors. And, law schools always have their own slant into where they want to send clerks. Maybe it's judges who are alums, judges who are in particularly in-demand regions, federal judges. We are allowing law students at every law school to reshuffle, and no longer do you have to go to a fancy T14 to get any information at all. And even then, I would caution no T14 law school is doing an adequate job of sharing candid information with their students. But any person who goes to any law school can pay $40 to access all the same information. And now law students nationwide are working from the same baseline information. And they can and are resorting accordingly. So, when we conceptualized this and we launched the platform, we worked hard to get law schools to work with us, to pay $5 per student per year to give all their students access to the platform. With the exception of a handful of law schools, Illinois Law was our first law school partner. Their students are getting access, yay, Illinois. Beyond them, we're having a lot of trouble getting law schools to subscribe. So we've opened it up to students. Law reviews have a reduced rate if they pay in bulk on behalf of all their e-board members. We're really not waiting on or beholden to law schools, just like we're not waiting on or beholden to the federal judiciary. But it's really kind of sad to see the intransigence, the entrenchment of these law schools who, like the federal judiciary, have no good reason to make changes. They give us lots of bullshit bad reasons not to make changes. And we'd love to see some more student uprising, more demand that these law schools make change. But in the absence of that, we are an independent third-party platform, happily operating on behalf of students and clerks.
It makes a lot of sense that the uptick in usage by students has been dramatic, like 100% year over year from what you're describing. And it's because there is such an absence in the market of having that kind of independent insight. And it's unfortunate that just like we were talking about earlier about how the incentives for judges and judicial clerkships are aligned in a way that could lend themselves to a bad actor. Not that all judges are bad actors, but that if somebody was, it doesn't have a check on it. And in the same way, when it comes to law schools, the incentives are also misaligned because they want to up their numbers. They want to look like they're, getting students into these prestigious clerkships and not necessarily incentivizing a check on whether or not those are good clerkships.
This
And
is such an
yeah,
important point, the misaligned incentives for law schools. And I hope everybody listening who is a lawyer or knows law students is kind of spreading the word about this. Because, law schools do not sadly have law students' best interests at heart. They are interested in increasing the number of students who clerk with little regard for whether the experience is positive. And every law student should be outraged that their law schools are benefiting off the public reporting of these clerkship numbers. I mean, if you look at T14 law schools' websites, they're so proud of their 100 law clerks this year. When there's a big difference between the number 5 and the number 6 law school in terms of how many clerks they send per year, query what the one is doing to increase their numbers by so much, perhaps sending some students into some unsafe work environments. We're not waiting on law schools, but we are saying, you have long received a free pass in the conversation about judicial accountability. Law schools, frankly, should be the first to step forward and make change. LAP works with two big stakeholders: judiciary, federal and state, and these law schools. And frankly, I thought, law schools would be the easier movers, but really they are just protecting judges, protecting abusive judges. Fortunately, as you pointed out, we've totally cornered the market on this. And, the word of mouth feedback will sustain this year after year. We were, a little worried trying to get this off the ground last year because we were facing pushback in the winter and spring from the judiciary and from some law schools. I had some awesome board members who encouraged me to just launch it, open it up to students, screw the law schools. If you build it, they will come. Those guys were right, and I really credit my board of directors for helping me get this off the ground. And now we're a little bit less worried. We can take a more critical, more aggressive stance toward the judiciary and toward the law schools because we are less beholden to them now. We are the only candid source of judicial clerkship information in the United States. To operate this, we are going to need to continue to charge law students each year, but it's a really small investment in their lives and careers. Law students will spend hundreds, perhaps thousands of dollars for, plane tickets and train rides and hotels to interview for clerkships. You could invest $40 on the front end to ensure that it's going to be a positive experience. And, it's so sad to see all these law clerks who are mistreated, who've uprooted their lives only to move to bumfuck wherever for a year, to be fired and retaliated against by a judge and have their career destroyed. And I share that anecdote because it is common. It is not just one law clerk who I am thinking of. That is a common pattern. That is when these clerks are reaching out to me. And it is so sad that law schools do not care what happens to their alums, not understanding that providing this information will not discourage anybody from clerking, though for the notoriously abusive judges, we hope it discourages those students from clerking for those judges. They'll get better clerkships. They'll be happier, thriving alums who will look back fondly on their law school time and be, donors and happy alums. It is the mistreated clerks who look back and point the finger at their law school for misleading them into unsafe work environments who are not such happy alums. But, most of these law schools have been fined to throw one or two law clerks under the bus to, maintain what they perceive as their clerkship prowess.
What I'm getting from all of this is that this is a lifetime project, like the legal accountability project is, it sounds like your charge. It's your mission to do this.
It is definitely my mission. I'm definitely galvanized to do this work every day. I think the accountability piece is probably what drives me the most. I mean, LAP is, I think, perceived by many as facilitating student clerkships, and our database does that, and that is fine. And that definitely, funds the work as well. But it is the larger accountability piece, accountability for the law schools who've received a free pass and who should be held liable for misleading their students, accountability for the abusive judges who have harassed their clerks with impunity for decades. And that's really what drives me. And so I spend a lot of time counseling clerks on their options and encouraging them to report. I spend some time on the legislative advocacy piece. And then we're doing a lot of thought leadership to spread the word and to empower and inspire, the next generation of change makers. But, it is gratifying work. It is meaningful work. And I think I'm the right person to do it. I think I'm galvanized by my own personal experience. And, when I hear these stories that mistreated clerks share with me, I'm just kind of thrown right back into my own abusive clerkship, and then the period after when I was fired, and then the period after that when I just gotten back on my feet and I was retaliated against and blackballed from my dream job. And it is my mission to ensure that that happens to many fewer people, and that those who that happens to know where to go for support and resources, because it was a dark time after I was fired from my clerkship. It was a dark time after I was retaliated against. And, I was looking for an attorney during that time. I was looking for resources, and really none existed. Now, fortunately, future Alizas, this resource does exist, and law clerks can reach out for advice, for an attorney referral, for support, and they know that they are not alone. And I know we mentioned earlier, the late Judge Reinhardt and Olivia Warren, who testified about her abusive clerkship after his death. And I watched her testify in 2020, and I was deep in my own clerkship hellscape. And when she said something about law clerks knowing they were not alone from hearing her speak, I needed to hear that. And so I tell clerks often that they are not alone, and that my experience is not rare, but it's one that's rarely shared. It's really important work. So,
Well, when I said a lifetime, it does seem like the climate right now may not be really conducive to change from within the judiciary. And, it may be that just what you're doing and doing it for many more years, that just creates this independent voice and, locus, like the center of accountability, that in itself will be maybe not sufficient, but a good fight to try to even the playing field. Do you think that at some point it may be possible for there to be change from within, where there's actually legislation that protects workers within the judicial branch?
So to be clear, it would not be change from within. It would be outside oversight by Congress to
Yeah.
legislate. Someday I am going to continue with that fight, and that is a fight for my career as well. You know, Congress has subpoena power as well. Congress can hold hearings. I would encourage them to think about those things. We will stay on Congress about the Judiciary Accountability Act in future congressional sessions. We'll see. It'll always be an uphill battle. The judiciary will always be antagonistic toward those trying to make change. That is, of course, because they are incentivized to protect the most abusive. They don't want anything to be publicly known about their misconduct and their ethical lapses. That's one place where LAP comes in. We're shining a very public spotlight We're going to continue critiquing them. And so, we'll see.
So for any law students that are listening to this, they've already gotten a lot of advice and insight from you. But like, what is one particular thing that you would want to highlight to them for them to take away from this?
So I'm going to say two or three things, but they're all important. So there is nothing more important than being mindful of who you clerk for. Clerkships are not created equal. And what I still worry about is some law students will talk to me about the database and they're very thankful. They have looked at it, they have looked at negative reviews, and they have still said, I can handle it. That is wrong. You should not handle it because, first of all, you won't. You will almost certainly be coming back to LAP in 6 months when you were miserable or you've been fired. And if you don't, by working for an abusive judge, you are perpetuating the problem. Because as long as abusive judges continue to get clerks, they will not be incentivized to change. The judiciary will not be incentivized to discipline them. You should not handle it. If you are a law student, you should pay the $40 to access LAP's database. Reach out if cost is a barrier because scholarship opportunities are available. Your student organization might want to pay for a bulk subscription, which would be cheaper. You should not go on a clerkship interview without checking LAP's database. You should not accept a clerkship with a judge who is not reviewed positively. This is my full-time job and life's work for the past 3 years to be deep in the space of judicial misconduct. LAP in our database, while we don't have all the harassers well documented, we have many, many, many. It is not a perfect system because it relies on law clerks to share their experiences and some are still fearful. But there are so many mistreated clerks who have shared their candid negative experience for the first time with us. You should trust the reviews in LAP's database. And if your law school is saying you should do it anyway, they are wrong and you should not listen to them. LAP has no misaligned incentives. I have no ulterior motive. My motive is ensuring that you as a law student go into a positive clerkship experience. LAP's database, in addition to having reviews of judges, we ask 2 mandatory questions to submit a survey. Rate your clerkship experience, positive, neutral, or negative, and rate the judge as a manager, positive, neutral, or negative. It is clear who the good bosses and the abusive judges are, and I just beg of you, law students, please listen. Please don't endure an abusive clerkship. The only way to change the system is if every single one of you says no to abuse and says, I'm going to demand better for myself and for my peers.
Well, Lisa, one last question at the end of this is just, and I think I get what your response might be, but like what makes this fulfilling at the end of the day? Like you're doing all of this, you're putting all of your energy into it, and as we both acknowledge, it could be your life's work to continue to go down this road and to fight this fight. What makes it worthwhile for you?
I am really galvanized by the mistreated clerks who reach out to me to share their negative experiences and to say that I empowered them to report. I think I can share this story because it's, several clerks have told me this, and it's anonymous. Numerous clerks have reached out to me and told me that hearing me speak and following LAP's work is what empowered them to quit their abusive clerkships early or to file judicial complaints against their abusive judges. And that's really what I want to say. I want to be empowering everybody to stand up for themselves. Nobody should endure abuse, and every abusive judge should be held accountable.
Well, I'm thrilled that you're out there and that you're fighting this fight. And I could just see, just with everything, like your voice, with your passion for it, that you're doing it, and we really do need someone like you out there. So thank you very much for what you're doing.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And for all of those that are watching, how can they keep in touch with you? How can they support the Legal Accountability Project?
So our website is legalaccountabilityproject.org. So folks can go there to join our mailing list, to donate. I'm very active on social media. My LinkedIn is very popular, so folks should follow me there. And then if you are a law student, you should register for clerkships database access at survey.legalaccountabilityproject.org. And if you are a former law clerk, that's also where you can go to submit a survey. We've really sparked a clerkship transparency movement, and we have many, many thousands of followers. And it's really awesome to see what we built over just 3 years. We built a lot out of nothing. There was nothing before. And now there's this whole movement and resources and supports that has really crossed the ideological spectrum. And it's just, yeah, follow us there, join our movement.
And it's an incredibly impressive movement. Thank you again for being on my show.
Thank you.
And thank you all for watching. See you next time. Thank you so much for watching the latest episode of the LawDroid Manifesto podcast. To keep in the loop about upcoming episodes, please subscribe to LawDroid Manifesto and you'll get notified. Thanks for watching. See you next time.